Hey everyone. Hey, I'm out here on a Sunday evening. Can't get out on the water this evening, unfortunately, so I am looking in to do some maintenance on my pedal drives. There's a few things that I've discovered, and credit goes out to my good buddy Jeremy Dennis, who also has one of these pedal drive units. These things are built really well, but they also need maintained. A couple things I've discovered, I want to pass on to everyone, and let's have a look at my pedal drive. I've already started here disassembling a couple things. This thing is actually pretty easy to take apart and do maintenance, but it does require just a tiny bit of work. But anyways, I want to pass on a few things. Let's get started here. Alright, I've got my pedal drive unit. I've already actually started to disassemble the top half of this. First thing I want to do before we get started though, so if anyone's experiencing any squeak because of the unit walking back and forth a bit while you're pedaling, a really simple fix that I found is just a couple single layers of a black electrical tape. Do a really neat job with it so that it's not very thick, and it'll prevent a lot of squeaking from happening. Just want to pass that a little bit on. But anyways, so I've begun disassembling the top head unit, and all you're going to need for that is to disassemble the 4 collar bolts that are located here. It's a 5/32 hex head key. Take those out, and what you're going to find is, just be mindful, there's a rubber O-ring there. Just watch for it, make sure it gets put back in place. It's a pretty tight fit, but you take those out, and the whole upper unit comes apart. Okay, I paused the video a little bit. I'm just unfortunately doing this with a cell phone in one hand, so I got it apart. You see these things are built really great, really tight tolerances. The gears and everything look great. Again, there's the O-ring here. Just make sure it stays intact and it goes back in place. I would recommend putting it right back in place as soon as you take it apart. That way when it goes back together, everything's good. And also, when you put this back together, you want to make sure that you keep your prop in line. So make sure that the right pedal is sticking up with the prop when you put that back together. And I would also recommend either putting some anti-seize or grease, whatever you have, in the thread holes, so that makes it guaranteed that you're going to get it apart in the future. Now what we noticed was in the unit itself, I had greased the unit through the fill hole on the side. That's the area where you apply grease. You take the hex head plug out and fill it full of grease with a grease gun, marine grease, and a grease needle. The problem is this entire cavity here was full of grease and barely applying any grease to the gear itself. So what you had was this was full of grease and there was barely any grease on the gear itself. So the unit doesn't get enough RPMs or enough heat to actually create the grease to run onto the gears. So you're not getting wonderful lubrication. However, it's a bit of a moot point because it is turning at such low RPMs. But the best thing to do is occasionally, I would say, I wouldn't do this any more than once a year, is go in and take the head unit off, put grease on the gear itself all the way around, and that should be enough to last you for an entire season. So that's what I did with the upper unit. I'm going to put it back together now. Again, when you put this together, I'd recommend some grease or some anti-seize in the threads so it'll come apart easy for you in the future. And again, make sure that your O-rings lined up, and that your right pedal's straight up and down so that your gear alignments and your prop alignment's correct. Okay, a bit of a pause there, but I'm back. I've got the head unit back on. Again, the right pedal straight up with your gear alignment, and then the bolts, I have those started in place. Applied a little bit of grease to each one, keep them from seizing up in the future. And then when you tighten these down, you don't want to just tighten one down really tight. You want to go even pressure. So there's only 4 bolts. Just snug one down, cross over to the opposite one, snug it down, and continue to crisscross back and forth so that there's even pressure being applied to the collar as you tighten it up. Alright, so I've got the head units all back together. Everything's tightened up, torqued down correctly. Don't want to overdo it. Make sure they're tight, make sure the seal, everything's good, but you obviously don't want to twist these off and break a bolt off. Just torque them down until they're good and tight, and that's all you'll need. The next thing I'm going to do is have a look at the lower unit. Not had it apart yet. What you're going to do is make sure you're working like I am on even a makeshift workbench, and we're going to have to put this unit into the deployed position so that the mounting head is slid up and locked in place. So I'm going to go ahead and pause my video and do that real quick. Alright, to lock this down, all I do is set it on the edge of the bench, the edge of something, push the unit down, make sure it's locked in place really good, and then we'll put that back up on the workbench. The upper unit, I'm going to start by removing these 4 collar bolts, 5/32 hex key, Allen key, whatever you want to call it. We'll take this apart. I've never had it apart, so we'll get to see what this looks like directly from the factory. Back here I have the lower unit apart. Again, it was only 4 bolts. It's built the exact same way. You got to watch for this O-ring, make sure it stays in place when you reassemble. So this is factory. There's grease in it. Probably sufficient, but not very much. Have a look at this. Again, guys, these don't turn at super high RPMs and they don't get hot. So you don't need a lot of grease. But I am going to apply some grease to the gears and just simply reassemble. When you put this back together, you want to make sure your prop is straight up and down with your pedal, your right pedal straight up and down to keep your prop alignment. But I'm going to go ahead and grease this up and reassemble. Back here, just so everyone knows what I'm using, I just at your local auto parts store, I'm getting general purpose, multi-purpose, Lucas oil products, marine grease. It's really good quality stuff. I've already applied it. Basically, you don't need a ton of grease here, guys. I just filled up gear with grease using my finger. There's no need to fill this compartment full of grease. I just greased up the gear itself, and that's all you're going to need. I'm going to put a little bit of grease in each one of these thread holes for my bolts, and that's it. That's all you're going to need, and I wouldn't say you need to do this any more again than once every year. Everything is built extremely well. Again, I mean, it's heavy duty, extremely tight tolerances. It's watertight. These things, I'm really impressed with how they're built. You can see the sealed bearings down inside. I don't know if you can't see in the video, but there's actually really nice sealed bearings in here. A person could actually work on this pretty easy if something went bad. But I'm going to go ahead and put this back together, and again, make sure your prop is lined up with your pedal straight up and down, and we'll see what it sounds like. These bolt down. I've got everything assembled, ready to tighten down, and what I wanted to show you, I guess real quick, was what I mean by prop alignment, to be sure that you understand. So I've got this laid on the bench, right pedal up and down, and the prop lined up and down. and you feel the gears mesh as you slide the lower unit back in place. Just make sure that's all aligned. Should be good to go. Now just to get everything tightened up. Get everything back together. Quick functionality test. This thing is feels smooth, feels good. Anyways, I hope this video helped you guys at least somewhat, gave you some ideas, and without taking your drives apart, a bit of understanding of how everything works inside. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, private message me. But anyways, as always, thanks for watching. Take care.